Hello, everyone. My name is Boyd Allen. I'm your host for a series of podcasts presented by the Coalition for the Protection of PEI Lands, titled Landlines, Discussions about Land Use on Prince Edward Island. The Coalition for the Protection of PEI Lands acknowledges that Prince Edward Island is part of the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. Furthermore, as non-Indigenous people today, we are inheritors of the treaties signed with the Mi'kmaq by our settler ancestors. At no time did these treaties grant rights of ownership to the settlers. To this day, therefore, in all our conversations, plans, and actions around the protection of PEI lands, the expression "our land" requires us to acknowledge that the word "our" must be understood as a shared responsibility, not ownership. We formed the Coalition for the Protection of PEI Lands in 2018 as a means to raise awareness about land issues in PEI and also to hold government to account on its responses to these issues. This series of podcasts is a result of consultations with our members and those who follow us on social media. We looked at ways we might try in the Coalition's continuing effort to share information and spark discussion on issues around land use and abuse on the island, and why successive governments have appeared unwilling to be transparent about why these issues continue to happen. Today's episode is titled Organic Agriculture on PEI. Can it provide a path forward? Our guest is Sally Bernard, award-winning organic farmer and co-owner of a several hundred-acre mixed certified organic farm in Freetown. Agriculture has been the primary industry on PEI since colonial times. Most islanders are still only a few generations from being on the land. The province's total farm cash receipts in 2024 were $828 million. According to the 2021 Census of Agriculture, the island had 1,195 farms, a number that has been declining over time. These farms cover approximately 504,000 acres of land, with an average size of about 422 acres. Some estimates state that there are approximately 47 certified organic farm producers on PEI, 250 acres per farm. What differentiates organic from conventional agriculture? One rudimentary comparison is as follows. Organic farming uses natural fertilizers derived from animal and plant matter to promote plant growth, natural methods to reduce pests, disease, and weeds. Conventional farming uses synthetic petroleum-based fertilizers to promote plant growth, also uses synthetically produced insecticides and herbicides to reduce pest, disease, and weeds. One foundational difference often cited between organic and conventional systems is that soil health in an organic system tends to improve over time due to proper nutrient cycling. Conventional systems remain relatively unchanged, or in some cases degraded, in terms of soil health. Needless to say, the differences between these methods of agriculture are much more complex than this, as are the shared challenges. As agricultural acreage shrinks every day here on the island, while production costs and land prices keep spiraling upwards, how the remaining land is farmed becomes even more important. The benefits of organic agriculture are widespread and well known. Preserving biodiversity, promotion of soil integrity, and generating lower greenhouse gas emissions alone provide reasons for encouraging expanding acreage and supporting greater market share. Here on the island, the first decades of the new millennium saw a marked expansion of organic farming. This seems to have plateaued, however, before the pandemic turned everyone's life upside down. As we regroup now in the mid-20s, what role will organic farming have in our landscape? Today, we are pleased to be joined by Sally Bernard. From farming roots, Sally graduated from Mount Allison University and obtained a diploma in plant science from the Dalhousie Agricultural College. In the early 2000s, Sally and her husband, Mark, transitioned their family farm in Freetown, PEI, to certified organic production. As their soil management practices improved and they witnessed land and nature respond positively to their organic practices, they became practitioners of regenerative farming. On top of raising 4 children and being an executive of many industry groups, Sally has been the recipient of local, regional, and national awards. She also manages the organic granary and barnyard organics. Thank you, Sally, for finding the time to join us today.
Thank you so much, Boyd. I'm thrilled to be here.
Now, as we said in the introduction, you and your husband began transitioning your conventional farm into an organic one early in the 2000s. Can you give us an idea of what it has become by 2025?
Sure. Yeah, it's changed a fair bit since we started, both coming from a conventional background and really got into it strictly because of a business plan. It looked good. It looked like there was a niche there, something we could cash in on, and that's where we started. But within a couple of years, we started to see that this was a real thing and there was a philosophy behind this, and we really got into that side of things and really started to see the benefits and sort of build towards that. So yeah, I can't believe it's been that long, but it is 2025 now, almost 2026. And yeah, it has changed a bit. I mean, we have 4 kids and we have switched the focus a little bit. We are still doing organic grains. That is our main focus. We have 550 acres that we grow organic grains on. We used to just sort of sell those off wholesale to whatever larger organic market there was, whether it was Quebec or further abroad. But now we keep all of our own grains and actually buy in quite a bit from other producers in the region to make organic animal feed. So we have a mill on the farm and we're selling to a lot of feed stores around the Maritimes and to individuals and homesteaders and things. So that's kind of become our main focus now, is buying in from other farmers that we have partnerships with and turning that into a sort of a mixed feed. So we have, I think, 9 different feeds for different animals. So that's kind of the focus. And then we also realized that we really had a gap in our sort of soil health in terms of missing livestock. So we were trading some clover for some manure from a dairy neighbor. But because he was conventional, we had to compost it or keep it on the farm for a while. So we weren't really getting, a big hit of nitrogen like you would with fresh manure. So we decided to try out having our own cattle. So we got some beef cattle a few years ago. I came from a livestock background, so it's kind of become my thing that I manage. And now we have the cattle and we sort of treat them like part of the crop rotation. So, we have an 8-year rotation with, barley 1 year, soybeans another year. And then within that rotation is cattle. So they come in and we graze them really intensively, meaning we only give them a little bit of land and we move them twice a day. So they're dropping a lot of manure over that season and then it goes back into cropping, a couple of years later. So that's been a really big change for us, is adding that livestock piece. It certainly adds some management complications. Anytime you add animals, there's new considerations in terms of instead of just having a crop out there. But it's been a fun challenge, and I think we've already seen the benefits from it. It's only been about 5 years, but we're seeing really significant benefits from that. And yeah, just doing a few different things, adding in more cover crops and trying to incorporate more no-till or reduce our till, because organic agriculture does require a fair bit of tillage to manage weeds. So trying to be a bit more conscious about that, sort of recognizing the impact of that.
Yeah, it's interesting in that it takes elements of the old traditional family farm back into this version of a family farm. Exactly.
Yeah, that mixed farm kind of mentality. You kind of have to, we've been pushed towards specialization and there really are some benefits of that mixed farm that you really lose, and it's kind of easy to forget about those benefits when you're just pushing really hard towards specialization.
Now, I'm going into from BAVEC's impact of organic farming on biodiversity. Now, they stated in it that organic farms generally have 30% higher species abundance and 50% higher abundance of organisms. It was also found that organic fields had up to 5 times higher plant species richness and 20 times higher pollinator species richness compared to conventional farms. And those are staggering numbers. How much of a factor do you think biodiversity is in current agricultural policy?
Yeah.
Or is it?
I don't know about agricultural policy and biodiversity. I would have answered this differently probably a couple of years ago. I would have been, biodiversity is great. Of course, we need it. But I'm going to come at from sort of two different ways here. And the first one is thinking of biodiversity on all levels, including under the soil. And so I think it was 2018 or 2019, we had someone out, Olivia Doran from up west, and she was an expert of the soil food web. And she brought her microscope down and got us to take a little soil sample from what we thought was our worst field and our best field. And she showed us under the microscope the difference of the soil biology. And we could see in our worst field that it was pretty much all just bacteria. And in the other field that still wasn't that great, but was our better field, there was a greater diversity of biology under there. So it wasn't just bacteria. There was some fungi, there was some protozoa, there was these other critters under there. And, as organic farmers, we've been doing it for 15 years, and we thought we had a pretty good idea of what made healthy soil. But seeing that visual was a total game changer for us. And it became our real core motivation was to increase that diversity of critters under the soil. So that was sort of how I started thinking of biodiversity at that level. But having just traveled for a couple of years to study for the Nuffield Canada Scholarship, my first stop was in Brazil. And I got a kind of entirely different perspective on biodiversity on a global scale. So the global north, we've all been pushing for carbon sequestration and climate change mitigation. And the global south is really focused on biodiversity. And Brazil in particular, they have the Amazon, and it is a very diverse, they've got tons of animal species, and it's a glorious, lush country. But they really are tackling a lot of their problems through a lens of biodiversity. And it gave me a whole new perspective on it. And we maybe are working towards the same outcome, but they're coming at it from a biodiversity perspective. And so they're making changes based on biodiversity first. And it probably is resulting in better carbon sequestration. Maybe, I think we are probably sequestering more carbon now because our focus has been on a diversity in the soil.
It appears in current policy coming from government that biodiversity is the most vulnerable marker, that they like the idea of biodiversity, but it is not a priority.
Right. Yeah. It's challenging. I think, even within our own pretty progressive country, we still have climate change deniers. But I think almost everyone can recognize that we are animals that are part of a greater cycle, and we are starting to lose parts of that cycle. Things are extinct, or, there's plants that are resistant to things, the system is breaking down. And as part of that system, we are vulnerable. And so when you look at it from that perspective, I don't think governments are doing that, but I think we're going to be forced to realize that as we lose bits and pieces of that cycle, we are the ones at risk. We are just as a part of that. Climate change from a carbon standpoint sort of is a bit of a selfish perspective of we need to save this for ourselves. Whereas the biodiversity lens looks at it sort of a bit further back, and we need to save this for all of the parts of the cycle. And you're right, our governments are not there. They're not that worried about that. And we've put so much emphasis on this carbon piece that, we're putting carbon capture and carbon credits and all of these things that are all very monetary based, which is, of course, stereotypical for the global north. But I just really appreciated that take from the global south of this is, we can look at this a different way and still achieve the same outcomes.
That it appears to respect the interconnectedness of all the various parts.
Exactly. Yeah. And not to say that what we're doing is the wrong thing up here, but I do think there is some real value in considering it just through a different lens. I think, I love that question because the more that I've come to think about biodiversity on more than just we need all the critters, and of course it's important, it really is fundamental to our success and existence moving forward.
Now, it's interesting because I have a friend who's an organic farmer, and beginning of angling season, there was kind of a pilgrimage to his farm.
Sure.
He was in the middle of potato ground, and there was nowhere that people could get worms to fish with. So they would all arrive at his place and dig for worms. And it kind of indicates that it's not just it's the connectedness of what biodiversity means. It means the ability for creatures to live in a certain element.
That's right.
But currently, the primary consideration, I would think, from the policy generating element of government is the pollinating side of it. That the pollinators are such a critical mix, and they're measurable. Their impact is measurable, and without pollinators, you have no yield.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's true. And at the same time, I would like to caution, I also traveled to the UK where the subsidies, they've been knocked back a bit. When I was there, the subsidies to encourage farmers to basically set land aside, pretty good land, not just marginal land, but like huge swaths of land they could get paid to not farm it. And I don't know that I agree that is the answer. I know that some of the Scandinavian countries are struggling a bit. Farmers are really struggling with some of the regulations and working within them. I do really, really believe that thoughtful agriculture can work with biodiversity, that there is a great way to encourage pollinators and build like a flourishing of biodiversity within agriculture without having to just rewild it or take it out of production. But certainly not the way that we're doing it as a...
But do you think that the inclusion of public oversight of some description would be of value? It seems at this time that fundamental decisions are being made for political reasons or for economic reasons, and there's no ability for public engagement in that process.
Yeah, so... like in terms of ecological monitoring on farms? Yeah, I think that's really valuable. And we have really tried to focus on doing that. And it's a hard thing to make yourself make time for.
Yeah.
Even as like pretty thoughtful, motivated farmers, we struggle to make the time to do that. And we know it's how valuable it is. So, yeah, maybe that is somewhere that the government or some sort of oversight could come into things. I would love that farmers could feel that they had the time and the priority to do that themselves, because we do learn so much about our land when we do make time for it. But it's a challenging thing to remember to do, even when it's your main motivator, to stop and take an afternoon and dig some holes or count some birds or whatever. Like it does take a real concerted effort. There is some potential there, I think.
Globally, agriculture's impact on climate change is well documented. Now, recent agricultural policies continue to force farmers to specialize and increase acreage to stay competitive. Do you think we can significantly lessen this impact without a worldwide transition from current practices?
Yeah, I tend to wear pretty rose-colored glasses, so I recognize that when I say this, but I do think there really is a quiet tide coming in with regenerative agriculture. And I do think it is reaching some pretty large-scale farms. And I think it's been, well over a decade that regenerative agriculture has been coming up, and it is now more recognized. And I think it is making a difference. Certainly specialization still is the top of the game, and that's the problem is that folks have, invested so hard in the specialization in terms of like loans and infrastructure and all that stuff. It's really hard to loosen up a bit on that when that is your whole market, your whole life. So I empathize with the folks that are kind of tied into the specialization that they've dove into. My topic that I was studying for my travels was livestock integration into cropping rotations, because it doesn't happen a lot here in the way that
at this time.
Researching it. Yeah, exactly. But I did learn a lot from folks who are doing it in other countries, just the benefits of one small benefit was stacking enterprises. So if you can graze sheep after you've harvested your crop, and they're just grazing the stubble or the weeds or whatever that are there. So from that same field that you have your marketable crop, you now also have lamb to sell. So there's these little tiny things that you can do that come from not stepping away from specialization, but just expanding what you can do on your land
at a scale that you are comfortable with.
Exactly. And you can expand that as you wish once you dip your toe in. But yeah, I think, and one of the 6 principles of regenerative agriculture is incorporating livestock. So it's there because of soil benefits, but there are also other benefits from that, like biodiversity, for example. So yeah, that is a tough one because every country has been pushed into specialization. I think Canada has done it maybe better than anybody, with all of our supply managed things. It makes it tough to swerve a bit, but it also makes us really vulnerable because we're not agile at all when it comes to disasters and things. So I think that is being recognized, that it's the farms who can sort of pivot that are more likely to survive, but it is very difficult to get away from specialization if that's what you've thrown all your chips into.
Now, Canadian organic standards, they require the potential organic land to be managed according to organic standards for a minimum of 36 months prior to the harvest of the first organic crop. This transition period can be costly for producers, as crop yields tend to decrease during the transition, and farmers are not receiving, as yet, the organic premium to make up the difference. What should be done to make this transition easier?
Yeah, I did this transition. We did it 20 years ago. And at the time, we were really lucky. And I think now there still is actually a provincial program within the department that does offer some financial relief in that transition period. I don't think it's significant, but there is something there to kind of help with that, because you're right, it is a difficult time. We chose, and we recognized that we had great privilege in this, to use our 36 months. And it took us, I think we did it over 6 years or something, between all of our 500 acres, but we chose to use that 36 months as kind of a rest period. So it had been rented out to potatoes. And so we just said, I think we need to just sort of feed that soil for 36 months before we start cropping it again. So we had the privilege of doing that because we were still renting out some land. There was still some income, and we were able to do that. And I wish that all producers who were transitioning could do that as well, because I think it was really crucial to our success. I mean, we also had the benefit of, there was a lot of residual fertility in that ground and very few weeds. So organics was actually really easy for us for the first few years. And we didn't see yield problems and we didn't see weed problems until the soil sort of became alive and all the weeds showed up and things got a bit more challenging. So I do empathize with folks that are starting fresh. They have a 36 break before they get to have some income. I think my husband, Mark, would come at this from a different angle because he's kind of the numbers guy. And he would suggest that part of the challenge is that banks don't tend to recognize organic agriculture, especially on a smaller scale, as kind of a viable loan recipient. He would compare it to, say, establishing like an apple orchard or cranberry bog. The bank would give you a loan for that establishment time, and you wouldn't anticipate a harvest for 5-10 years. And here we're only asking for 36 months. So while they're different, there is similarities there, but the banks wouldn't recognize an organic transition as a thing that you would loan to someone so that they could, it's different, but in the end, it's pretty similar.
But there'd also be ramifications as far as insurance is concerned.
Yes. Yeah, that's right.
And crop insurance and various things like that as well.
Yeah, crop insurance is a real challenge for us. They don't recognize, because our yields are less, it's not metered out the same way to us. So
it's not a given. It's not a formula that they're comfortable with.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think it's 60% of what regular insurance would be. So yeah, there is a number of challenges with organic being recognized sort of as an equal player.
CFI organic certification is required to sell products interprovincially or internationally. But when it comes to products being sold within PEI, the same standards may not apply. There are small farms that can't afford the time and money involved in the certification process, and they do not claim organic status. Now, should the provincial government be more proactive in providing an enforcement strategy or provide some kind of structure to work with that?
Yeah, this is a tricky one for a number of reasons. I mean, I can speak just personally. We certify everything except, say, our beef, for example. So we have our beef for fertility and for soil health. The actual beef itself that we sell would be a byproduct. So I don't manage it the same way that a beef producer would. So I don't have the same level of paperwork, which maybe I should, but I don't. And the inspection process is arduous. Like when we get inspected once a year, they tend to be there for at least 8 hours. It is very intensive. We need to show a receipt for every cut of beef, for example, if I was selling it, to prove that I'm not buying in conventional beef and selling it as organic. So they want to see that our yield matches our sales, which is great. That's what makes them work, the standards, I mean. But when it comes to selling beef, I already have a pretty loyal customer base. I know that my product is really good. It's treated organically. I could easily certify it, but I choose not to because it's expensive and I don't have that paperwork necessarily in place. So just from a personal perspective, I can appreciate the frustration if there were an organic beef producer who was certified and then they saw me selling it, and I'm not claiming it's organic, but people would probably assume that it is. And it could be, but it's not. I'm not paying the fee. So I can appreciate the frustration of those folks. And we have neighbors that sell organic vegetables, and they also have chicken that's not raised organically or fed organically. And it's sort of just assumed from folks at the farmer's market that chicken is organic because all the vegetables are. I get it. That's frustrating when my chicken is probably $1 a pound more than theirs because it is organic. I get the frustration. We do have the legislation in place here in PEI. It's just not enforced. And I don't know that, for example, back to the chicken example, I am still sold out of chicken constantly, and I have so much more demand than I have supply. So I could be upset at that person, but I'm not, because my product is all sold and I could sell more if I wanted to. I think if we had a great surplus of organic product to sell and competition felt more fierce, then we may need to look into having some enforcement or having a complaint line or something. But as it stands, organic product is moving and people are willing to seek it out and pay for it. So
now, organic products are generally viewed as healthful alternatives.
Sure.
So during a recent public survey, respondents were asked what premiums they were willing to pay for organic products. Mm. Results showed that a majority, 80%, were willing to pay a premium, and 48% saying they were willing to pay up to 10%, and 25% of the respondents saying they would pay up to 25%. The premium, of course, is necessary to account for more labor-intensive methods and less predictable yields. Now, what needs to be done to increase market share for organic products? I mean, I know that's a question that's been asked for a long time.
Yeah. And I think if we're just talking about PEI or the Maritimes, I think it's the wrong question. I think the question should be, how do we increase organic supply? Because our demand, the market is huge and the supply is tiny. So, yeah, on a broader scale, we probably do need to increase the market. And I don't have my thumb on the heartbeat of our exports here. I know we only have a very few organic farms that are exporting outside of the province. Most folks are just selling domestically. And as a rule, all the organic product is moving. Like, I get calls still every week for chicken and beef and pork and wheat. And I know that Grower Station, which is the local sort of farmer-led food cooperative, they're moving lots of product.
But by the same token, as a consumer, I walk into a Sobeys,
sure,
and I can access organic potatoes from Washington State.
Yes.
But I cannot access organic potatoes from Prince Edward Island. It is an ongoing struggle to find them.
Yes.
Now, is that a supply side issue or is that a marketing issue?
I think that's just our messed up food supply. I think it's just the way that food moves around this country. It's so inefficient. Well, and from other countries also. It's just wild how food moves, and the distribution channels would boggle your mind. Yeah. I guess when I think of organics on PEI, I think of getting it from your local farmer. But you're right. Those grocery stores, because they tend to only want to deal with huge distributors, and most organic farmers on PEI are selling direct, through farmers markets or channels are. Yeah, it tends to be a very different world. I think most organic farmers on the island are thinking very much of their neighbor. Whereas, there are a few that are exporting, certainly, and they have a whole other different group of challenges when it comes to those grocery stores and those chains and all of those distribution channels that I can't get my head around. We sell our feed, for example, within the Maritimes only. We do have demand from outside the Maritimes, but we've just opted to stick within the Maritimes for now. And I think one of our greatest challenges, just speaking personally, is just sort of broadly, I'm going to say capital is greed. But what we see is we sell our feed at a wholesale price to, say, the local feed store. And this happens across the Maritimes. We know what we sell it to them for. They, of course, a lot of them have their own sort of store brand. So let's just use Co-op because that's a big feed store chain. So they have their own Co-op brand. So when you go in to ask for feed, which you have to do at a feed store, you can't just go and grab the feed off the shelf because it's all back in the warehouse. So you go up to the counter and you say, oh, I'd like some chicken feed. The person behind the counter is not going to say, oh, do you want organic? Or if you walk in and say, I would like some organic chicken feed, they're likely to say, oh, but the Co-op stuff is like $20 cheaper. So I see that also where I sell my eggs. The margin on my eggs, I know, is higher than the other eggs that are there. There's 4 other farms' eggs there, but mine are the only ones that's certified organic. And I know that that retailer sees the word organic and says, oh, I can put an extra $1 on that margin. That's super frustrating because one of our values as a farm is to keep our products accessible to folks.
Yes.
And at the farm, our prices are what we think pretty reasonable. But when we go out into the world and see our products, they have been jacked up more than what I think is necessary. I don't own those retail spots, but I just think there is a little bit of greed there that says, oh, well, the organic folks have lots of money. They're going to pay extra for that. We'll put a little extra margin on there.
Is what the market can bear.
Yeah. And of course, there are folks that can bear that, but there's a lot of folks that can't, that would like to access it.
And it's not an accessible product because you can't afford it.
Exactly. But if it was closer in price, then people, as they indicated on that survey, would be willing to pay that margin.
Now, do you feel the provincial government's institutional procurement policy is fair to organic producers?
Yeah, so I don't actually know the ins and outs of the institutional procurement policy. I know that Morgan Palmer did a really, really great project on this for the Certified Organic Producers Cooperative, probably almost 10 years ago, but 5 years ago. And she looked into this. Unfortunately, the reality now, again, is that we just don't have a lot of excess product. So I don't think it's that we're necessarily intentionally being kept out of that policy. I think there really just isn't enough product to go around. Folks are really seeking out island organic products. If I was an exporter, I might have a different answer. Again, I don't know the ins and outs of, say, how Atlantic Grown Organics, the year-round greenhouse in Kensington. I don't know if maybe they do feel some struggles with that policy. I know that one of the things Morgan identified in her sort of call to action at the end was the need for the kind of infrastructure that can process, say, vegetables so that we can have frozen vegetables available for the institutional procurement. Because right now, pretty much even conventional vegetables are coming from wherever they have those, the quick freeze facilities and the processing and the peeling and whatever. Like, we just don't have it here. So we're missing a bit of infrastructure in order to access larger orders like an institutional procurement. So, yeah, I don't know if we're being unfairly kept out of it. I don't think we have enough product to demand more inclusion at this point for farmers.
Yeah, it's almost literally a chicken or egg.
You're right, exactly.
You need more product in order to generate the need for more product.
Exactly. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
So, regenerative agriculture has been described as an outcome-based food production system that nurtures and restores soil health, protects the climate and water resources and biodiversity, and enhances farms' productivity and profitability. It encompasses the principles of organic agriculture while supporting fair trade, labor practices, and intergenerational equity. How has adopting regenerative agriculture practices changed your farm?
It's a great question. I really love regenerative ag. I think I probably wouldn't have identified with the term so much until after I had done some travels and been to the UK and stuff where it was kind of really embraced. And I appreciated a bit more. Our struggle with organics has been that because it relies so heavily on tillage, we knew that our soil was not sort of flourishing the way that we anticipated it would when we first started thinking organic was the answer to everything. So the fact that regenerative ag really is sort of soil-based, whereas organics has kind of become rules-based. There's these certain rules. If you break them, then you're no longer certified. Regenerative agriculture is a bit more, it's built a longer table. And a lot of farmers, even conventional, are doing little regenerative practices here and there. They wouldn't identify as regenerative farmers, but they are doing things like cover cropping, for example, or grazing or whatever. So I kind of love that it's opened the door a bit. And once you start doing things like cover cropping, you kind of can't help but notice benefits. And what I love about regen is that it is sort of farmer driven. And while the market is, of course, trying to get in on it and market regenerative things, it really started with farmers, for farmers, by farmers. And the results of it are not necessarily something that, there are the certification now, you can be rock certified or whatever. And sure, you might see some market benefits, but the real benefits that you're after are ones that happen on your own soil. And a lot of time, organics is motivated by that market share increase, whereas I think regen is really motivated by those soil changes and the changes that you see on your farm. So it changed us. It changed our perspective. It changed us to the soil was the real motivating factor, and the biodiversity within that soil and the soil being healthy is our motivator, and then the yields are sort of an indicator of that. So that's really it. That's been the driver now.
Now, how important do you think that adopting like the regenerative agriculture principles become as we look at it in certain future, an uncertain climate?
Yeah, I mean, having resilient soil is going to be the thing that saves us. So if we can have soil that holds more water in drought or sheds more water when there's a flood, or if we have a greater biodiversity, for example, for my cattle, I don't want to treat them with a chemical to keep the flies off of them in the summer. So I've been building swallows' nests and trying to encourage, aerial insectivores.
There's a clear necessity for a global reevaluation of agricultural techniques.
Yes.
And from what little I understand of regenerative agriculture, it provides a means of solving a lot of problems in one fell swoop. I mean, in that acceptance of the interconnectedness of the various components, if nothing else.
Yes, that's right. And I think resilience is at the core of regen. And as a side effect of doing all the things, you're going to end up being more resilient and ideally contributing to the greater good of sequestering more carbon and building in pollinator habitat.
Even as an observer looking around the island, there are more regenerative agriculture elements, cover crops, emphasis on soil health being adopted by conventional farmers. Mm-hmm. What needs to happen to make that more widespread, I wonder? To make it more time sensitive?
Yeah, I think probably our greatest threat is a lack of farmers. Losing farmland is one thing, and that is a real serious problem. I think losing farmers is going to be a bigger problem sooner. And I think that regen is one of the things that a new farmer can embrace and bring without any of the stigma that a conventional farmer might have, and be a little bit resistant to adopting something if it feels just like this woo-woo hippie thing. I think we really, really need to work hard to build in policy that supports new entrants. This is a little bit off topic, but when I went to the UK, I had this idea that the whole tenancy situation was, really oppressive and awful. And I came away from there feeling like this is our way forward.
I was going to ask you that very question.
Yeah,
actually.
I do feel like maybe our landowner is not some old money rich person. Maybe it is, but maybe it's the government that takes on the role of offering tenancies to new entrants in order to foster new farmers. We are going to be our food sovereignty, our food security as most at risk due to a loss of farmers. And we need to be stemming that right now. We're already too late as far as I'm concerned. We need more farmers so desperately. And those are the folks that are going to be looking to adopt these, regen practices, organic practices, because they come with that already. That's one of their motivations for getting into farming are those values. So I think if we can foster new folks coming in and stem that loss of farmers, that's probably our greatest step forward And yeah, it's not an easy one, because it's hard when you're a farmer who's worked your whole life and you have your retirement ahead of you and you can sell it all in one fell swoop to Cavendish for millions of dollars, or you can take the risk on leasing it for some meager amount to some new entrant with a crazy business plan. Those are tough odds, like it's pretty obvious which way you're going to go. But I do think there are more and more farmers concerned about that food sovereignty piece moving forward, and are going to be looking to make some tough decisions.
And there is less land.
That's right. Exactly. Yeah, all the time.
So there's a need for a more proactive access.
Yeah.
There's been all kinds of discussion over the years about land banking and various things like that.
Sure.
And there's also the idea of tenancy. And the tenancy has a stigma attached to it.
It does, yeah.
But in appropriate settings, there's no reason why it could not work.
Yeah, exactly. And what I saw in the UK was tons of young people just they're presenting a business plan in competition with other young people, and they're not committing to it for life. Some of these tenancies are 5-10 years, which feels wild as a farmer. I've been doing it for 20 and I still feel like I'm just figuring it out. And I can't imagine investing a bunch of blood, sweat, and tears into this thing and there's only a 10-year lease. But they're doing it. They want to do it. And I think it really is a potential way forward. So I hope that the next time a farm comes up for sale that, it's not a given that some big corporation's going to buy it. Maybe we can consider a different step forward, and maybe the government buys it and then people can apply to run it. I don't know.
But it also takes the extreme pressure of turning out yield. You don't have the same debt load going into it necessarily as a tenant.
Yes. No, exactly. Yeah. The pressure is a little less. You would have some sort of lease payment or whatever the agreement is. You can't just throw things at the wall and see what sticks. But yeah, you're right. It takes off some of that. And the push into specialization, if it's only a 10-year thing, you're not going to invest billions and billions into some extravagant infrastructure for whatever. You're going to need to be a bit agile. So I really think we need to consider that.
And in terms of the demographics, at least a tenancy structure, an awareness of this as a potential could have an impact on the demography of it all.
Yeah. No, exactly. I think we do. We have a hangover from colonialization where we are so territorial about our land. And as Mark and I are unbelievably already in the era of discussing succession to the next generation, whether it's our kids or somebody else's, and trying to think about all of the different means of deriving an income from our farm. There's 1,000 possibilities of, maybe you do an agritourism thing or a glamping thing or there's all of these different things that we would love to have people come in with an idea and have that happen. So yeah, PI is so rich in agricultural history and information and so much good resources here and interconnectivity within communities. I just think it would be such a great place to show that this can work in Canada. So yeah, I'm hopeful for that. I know that there's farmers looking to retire within the next 10 years that are trying to figure out how to keep it a farm and not have it go to ribbon development or to a big corporation. So I think the discussions are happening. I hope if I see it within my lifetime that we can make it easier for new entrants to get in and not just sold to the highest bidder.
So thank you, Sally, for making the drive into town today and sharing some of your knowledge and your perspective with us. How we farm what land we have left is too important to take for granted. What have been standard farming practices must adapt to a changing climate. Bringing new ideas into the discussion is critical to not only the agricultural industry's viability, but that of the community as well. PEI had approximately 1,135 fewer farm operators and 650 fewer farms in 2021 compared to 2001. The continued decline of rural communities reflects this. More organic farms could help reverse this trend. They not only provide an estimated 30% more jobs per hectare than conventional farming, but recent surveys show that 51% of the organic farm operators were between the ages of 21 and 45. Younger farmers reinvigorate the community and strengthen the farming industry. If the 3-year crop rotation is complied with, roughly half the acres classified as agricultural on PEI are actively involved in potato production. Despite the sincere efforts to mitigate its negative impacts, there is a need to transition some of this land into other crops. Regenerative agriculture could be the key component in this transition. Once again, we thank you, Sally, for being with us. Also, thank you to those of you who have listened to our conversation today. We welcome any comments you may have. If you found anything of interest, please share our podcast and consider becoming a subscriber.
Thank you.